A 20-year-old private stands at the base of a volcanic ridge, staring upward at an opening in the rock that has already killed 11 men. The machine gun inside has a perfect field of fire. Every approach is a kill box. Every assault ends the same way. But he sees something no one else has seen. Not a weakness in the enemy, a weakness in geometry itself. In the next 8 minutes, he will climb toward that gun, cook a grenade in his hand with the fuse burning against his palm, and drop physics itself onto the men below. What happens next will rewrite doctrine, save hundreds of lives in caves yet to be cleared, and prove that sometimes the most important question in war is not how brave you are, but which direction you're thinking. March 14, 1945. The island of Iwo Jima is 3 weeks into a battle that was supposed to last 5 days. The volcanic rock is soaked with blood from both sides, and the Marines of Fox Company, 2nd Battalion, 26th Regiment, 5th Marine Division, are stalled at a landscape feature that has no official name but will be remembered by survivors as Bloody Gorge. The terrain here is not like the beaches. It is not like anything the Marines trained for. The island's volcanic origins have created a topography of vertical chaos, deep ravines cutting through fields of jagged rock and black sand, and every fold in the ground is a potential firing position. The Japanese have spent months turning this advantage into a mathematical nightmare for anyone trying to move forward. The gorge itself is a natural choke point, a depression in the earth flanked by ridges of compacted ash and stone. At the far end, carved into the ridge face approximately 15 feet above the gorge floor, is a cave mouth. It is not large, perhaps 4 feet high, maybe 5 feet across. But size is irrelevant when what matters is the angle. From that opening, a Type 92 heavy machine gun has a sweeping view of the entire approach. The gun is a legacy of Japanese industrial pragmatism, a 7.7mm weapon fed by 30-round strips, capable of sustained fire at a rate that turns the air itself into a wall. The Marines have already tried to take this position. Twice. 11 men are dead. The problem is not courage. The problem is physics. When you assault a fortified position horizontally, you are moving into the weapon's design envelope. The machine gun is built to fire across flat or gently sloping terrain. Its traverse is wide. Its range is measured in hundreds of meters. The men who serve it have practiced interlocking fields of fire, overlapping zones where no matter how you move, you are inside someone's sight picture. The doctrine is simple. Suppress the position with rifle fire, move forward under covering fire, close the distance, and finish with grenades or satchel charges. But doctrine assumes the enemy is in a position you can suppress. Doctrine assumes you can see the men shooting at you. Doctrine assumes that if you throw a grenade, it stays where you threw it. None of that applies here. The cave mouth is elevated and recessed. Rifle fire from below cannot reach the gun crew without the Marines exposing themselves fully to return fire. The angle is wrong. You would have to stand upright in the open and fire upward, and the moment you do, you are visible, stationary, and dead. Suppression requires that the enemy keep their heads down. But the enemy is already behind rock. They do not need to keep their heads down. They simply wait, and when you move, they fire. The geometry is unbeatable. This is the essential problem of cave warfare. The defender has cover, elevation, and patience. The attacker has none of these and must generate all three under fire or die trying. Artillery has been tried. The forward observer called in missions twice on the first day. High explosive rounds impacted the ridge above and around the cave mouth, blowing apart the surface rock and filling the air with dust and fragments. When the dust cleared, the gun was still firing. The cave goes back into the rock. How far, no one knows. Deep enough that the pressure wave and fragmentation from an artillery shell dissipate before they reach the gun itself. The Japanese learned this at Tarawa, at Peleliu, at every island where they traded space for time and built their defenses not on the surface but beneath it. Concrete and coral and stone absorb blast energy. Cave is not a bunker. You cannot collapse it with field artillery unless you score a direct hit on a weak point you cannot see. And even then, the men inside have time to move deeper. Flamethrowers have been tried. A Marine from the engineer platoon volunteered to move forward with a backpack rig, the M2-2 model, 70 pounds of napalm thickened with gasoline, pressurized with nitrogen, effective range 40 meters under ideal conditions. The conditions were not ideal. He made it within 30 meters before the machine gun found him. The tanks on his back did not explode the way they do in movies. They ruptured. The fuel spilled across the rocks and ignited from the tracers still impacting around his body. The smoke gave the platoon enough concealment to pull him back. He survived with burns across his legs and back. The cave was untouched. Flamethrowers require line of sight and proximity. The cave mouth is elevated and the fuel stream arcs downward. To hit the interior, you would need to be above the opening or directly in front of it, and both positions are killing grounds. So the platoon is stuck. Fox Company cannot advance while that gun is active. The ridgeline beyond the gorge is the next objective, but the gorge is the only route forward that does not require scaling cliffs under fire from other positions. The company commander has 3 choices. He can call for another artillery mission and hope for a lucky hit. He can wait for air support, request a napalm strike, and hope the blast wave reaches deep enough. Or he can send more men into the gorge and hope that attrition eventually silences the gun. All 3 options assume time the Marines do not have, resources that are finite, and casualties that are mounting across the entire division. The island is not secured. There are still thousands of Japanese soldiers alive in the cave networks and tunnel systems. Every hour the advance stalls is another hour the enemy uses to reposition, reinforce, and prepare the next defense line. Private Franklin E. Sigler is not thinking about grand strategy. He is 20 years old, a rifleman in the 2nd Squad, recently promoted from private first class after the previous squad leader was killed. He has been on Iwo Jima for 3 weeks and in the Marine Corps for less than 2 years. He is not a demolitions expert. He is not a scout sniper. He is not trained in cave assault tactics because no such training exists in any formal sense. What he has is a rifle, a helmet, a few fragmentation grenades clipped to his cartridge belt, and the accumulated experience of watching men die in ways that make no sense until you understand the terrain. And he has been watching this cave for 2 hours. The platoon is dug into whatever cover the ground provides, shallow scrapes behind rocks, prone positions in the ash, anything that puts mass between a man and the machine gun. The gun fires in bursts. The Japanese crew is conserving ammunition, which means they are not rattled. They fire when they see movement or when they think they see movement. The sound of the Type 92 is distinct, a slower, heavier rhythm than the American Browning, and every burst is a reminder that the equation has not changed. Sigler is not in command. He is not being ordered to solve this problem. But he is looking at the ridge face and he is doing something that many men in combat do not have the luxury of doing. He is thinking vertically. The cave is 15 feet above the gorge floor. 15 feet is not a climb that requires specialized equipment. It is not a cliff. The rock is broken, fractured by weathering and explosions, and there are enough irregularities to provide handholds and footholds if you are willing to make the attempt. The question is not whether you can climb it. The question is whether you can climb it without being shot. And then, if you reach the top, what do? You cannot shoot into the cave from above unless you lean over the edge and expose yourself, and the moment you do, you are silhouetted against the sky and the crew will kill you. You cannot use a flamethrower because you do not have one. You could throw a grenade, but the same problem applies. The moment you appear at the edge, you are visible. And even if you throw before they shoot, a grenade thrown into a cave mouth has to go through the opening and detonate inside. If it bounces off the rock or rolls back out, it explodes harmlessly outside or in your face. The Japanese know this. They have been fighting cave warfare for years. They will roll it back out or kick it back toward you before it detonates. This is standard procedure. This is what they train for. But Sigler is not thinking about throwing the grenade. He is thinking about dropping it. And he is thinking about time. A fragmentation grenade has a fuse. The American Mark II, the pineapple grenade, uses a 4 to 5 second delay fuse. You pull the pin. You release the spoon. The striker hits the primer and ignites the fuse. Then you have approximately 4 to 5 seconds before the explosive filler detonates. The standard procedure is to throw immediately after releasing the spoon. You do not hold it. Holding a live grenade is how you lose your hand or your life if the fuse is defective or shorter than expected. But the fuse delay is also why grenades can be returned. If you throw it the moment you release the spoon, and it takes 2 seconds to arc through the air and land, the enemy has 2 or 3 seconds to recognize it, pick it up, and throw it back. If they are fast, if they are trained, they will do exactly that. The Marines have seen it happen. The Japanese have seen it happen. Everyone knows the rhythm. But if you hold the grenade for 3 seconds after releasing the spoon, cooking it, letting the fuse burn down in your hand, then when you release it, the enemy has 1 or 2 seconds. Maybe less. Not enough time to react. Not enough time to pick it up. Not enough time to throw it back. It detonates where it lands. This is not a new tactic. Men have been cooking grenades since grenades were invented. But it requires nerve and math and a willingness to hold an explosive device that is counting down in your hand, trusting that you have estimated correctly and that the fuse is not defective. If you hold it too long, it detonates in your hand. If you do not hold it long enough, it can still be returned. The margin is seconds. The consequence of error is absolute. Sigler watches the cave mouth. He watches the angle of the sun and the shadows on the rock. He watches the timing of the machine gun bursts, and he makes a decision that will either save the platoon or kill him in the next few minutes. He tells his squad leader what he intends to do. The squad leader, a corporal who has survived 3 weeks on this island by knowing when to trust his men and when to stop them, looks at the ridge, looks at Sigler and does not stop him. There is no formal approval. There is no radio call to the company commander. There is simply a nod and the understanding that if this works, it will matter, and if it does not, they will still be stuck. Sigler moves forward. He does not run. Running in this terrain is suicide. He moves in the crouch that every infantryman learns, low and fast, using the folds in the ground, staying below the sight line of the cave mouth as much as possible. The rest of the squad opens fire on the cave, not because they expect to hit anything, but because noise and bullets make the enemy hesitate, make them pull back slightly, give them something to think about other than the lone Marine crossing the gorge floor. The machine gun does not fire. Either the crew is reloading, or they are waiting for a better target, or the covering fire is doing exactly what it is supposed to do. Sigler reaches the base of the ridge. The rock face rises above him. 15 feet. He slings his rifle across his back. He pulls a grenade from his belt. He does not pull the pin yet, and he starts climbing. The rock is sharp. Volcanic stone has no smooth edges. Cuts through cloth and skin. His hands find holds that are barely there, protrusions of stone that support his weight for the second it takes to move his foot higher. He is breathing hard. Not from exertion. From the knowledge that if the gun crew realizes what he is doing, they will lean out and fire straight down, and there is no cover on a cliff face. He climbs without looking up. Looking up means shifting your weight wrong. It means losing your balance. He climbs by feel, by the pressure of stone against his palms and the friction of his boots against the rock. The sound of rifle fire from his squad is continuous. The machine gun is silent. That could mean anything. He reaches a ledge, a narrow shelf of rock just below and to the side of the cave mouth. He cannot see inside the cave yet. He is still below the angle, but he is close. Close enough that he can hear voices. Japanese. Shouting. Not panicked. Urgent. They know something is happening. They do not know what. He presses himself against the rock and reaches for the grenade. His hands are shaking. Not from fear. From adrenaline. The body does not distinguish. He pulls the pin. The metal clinks against the spoon. The sound is tiny, but in his mind it is deafening. He holds the spoon down with his thumb. The fuse is not burning yet. Not until he releases the spoon. He needs to move higher, to a position where he can reach over the lip of the cave mouth and drop the grenade straight down. But if he moves now while holding the grenade with the pin pulled, he risks dropping it or releasing the spoon accidentally. He clips the grenade back to his belt carefully, holding the spoon, and climbs higher. 3 more feet. His head is now level with the cave floor. If anyone inside looks toward the opening, they will see him. He does not look inside. He pulls the grenade again, wraps his fingers around it, pulls the pin for the second time, and this time he releases the spoon. The spring flicks the spoon away with a metallic snap. The striker falls. The primer ignites. The fuse is burning. He can feel the heat of it through the metal casing. 4 to 5 seconds. He counts. 1, 2, 3. The voices inside the cave are louder. Someone is shouting orders. The machine gun starts firing again. Long bursts aim down into the gorge where the squad is still providing covering fire. 4. He leans over the edge, extends his arm into the cave mouth, and releases the grenade. It drops. It does not arc. It does not tumble. It falls straight down under gravity, and gravity is not something you can throw back. The explosion is not louder than other explosions. It is different. The sound does not dissipate into open air. It reflects off stone, compresses, amplifies. The pressure wave has nowhere to go except deeper into the cave and back out through the mouth, and when it comes back out it carries dust and smoke and a spray of fragments that have ricocheted off every surface inside. The machine gun stops firing. Completely. Immediately. Sigler does not wait to see what happened. He pulls another grenade. Pin out. Spoon off. Count. 1, 2, 3. Drop. The second explosion comes before the dust from the first has settled. This time there is a secondary sound, a metallic clanging, something heavy falling or breaking. He pulls a third grenade. Same process. Count. Drop. Detonate. The physics of what is happening inside that cave are straightforward but brutal. A fragmentation grenade contains approximately 2 ounces of TNT or a similar explosive compound surrounded by a coiled wire or notched metal casing designed to fragment into dozens of high-velocity shrapnel pieces upon detonation. In open air, those fragments spread outward in a roughly spherical pattern, losing energy as they travel, dangerous within a radius of 5 to 15 meters depending on terrain and luck. In a confined space, the fragments do not spread spherically. They reflect. They bounce. Every surface they hit redirects them at a different angle, and the confined space ensures that those angles intersect with anything inside the space multiple times. A man standing in a cave when a grenade detonates is not hit by fragments traveling in one direction. He is hit by fragments traveling in every direction, including fragments that have already bounced off the walls and ceiling and are coming back. The pressure wave is worse. Explosives do not just create fragments. They create an instantaneous expansion of gas at pressures that exceed normal atmospheric pressure by orders of magnitude. In open air, that pressure dissipates quickly, spreading outward in all directions until it equalizes. In a confined space, it cannot dissipate. Compresses. It reflects back on itself. The result is overpressure, a term that understates the violence of what happens to a human body when the air around it suddenly compresses and then decompresses faster than tissue can respond. Eardrums rupture. Lungs collapse. Blood vessels burst. Even if the fragments miss you, the pressure does not. And Sigler has just dropped 3 grenades in rapid succession into a space no larger than a small room. He climbs down. Not carefully. Fast. The cave is silent. No voices. No movement. No machine gun. But he is still exposed and there are other positions on this ridgeline. He reaches the gorge floor and sprints back to his squad's position, staying low, and throws himself into the dirt behind a rock. His hands are cut. His palms are burned from the grenade casings. He is breathing so hard he cannot speak. The squad leader is staring at him. The silence from the cave is louder than the explosion was. The platoon waits. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing. The machine gun does not resume firing. The squad leader sends 2 Marines forward to check the cave. They move carefully, rifles up, ready for anything. They reach the ridge face. They climb to the cave mouth. They look inside. One of them vomits. The other waves the platoon forward. When Sigler and the rest of the squad reach the cave, they see what the grenades did. The Type 92 machine gun is on its side. The barrel bent, the feed mechanism shattered. There are 4 bodies. They are not intact. The cave walls are scorched and pitted with fragment impacts. The ammunition strips are scattered and some of them have cooked off from the heat, adding their own small explosions to the chaos. There is no way to know which man was killed by which grenade or whether all of them died instantly or some of them lived long enough to understand what had happened. It does not matter. The position is destroyed. The gun is destroyed. The gorge is open. Fox Company advances. Sigler is not with them. While he was climbing down from the ridge, a Japanese sniper somewhere on the next ridgeline saw him. The round hit him in the side, below the ribs, and punched through without hitting anything immediately fatal but doing enough damage that he is bleeding heavily and cannot stand without help. The corpsman is already working on him, packing the wound, trying to stop the bleeding enough to move him to an aid station. Sigler refuses. Not verbally. He cannot speak clearly. But he pushes the corpsman away and crawls toward another Marine who is also wounded, a rifleman who was hit during the covering fire and is lying exposed in the gorge. Sigler drags him into cover. Then he sees another. He drags that Marine into cover as well. Then he props himself against a rock, unslung his rifle, and provides covering fire for the platoon as they move through the gorge and up the next ridge. This continues for 8 minutes. Sigler is losing blood. His vision is tunneling. His hands are shaking so badly he can barely hold the rifle. But he keeps firing. Not wildly. Aimed shots at positions where he thinks the enemy might be. The act of firing is not about killing anyone at this point. It is about noise and presence and the psychological effect of knowing that someone is still shooting back. The platoon clears the next ridge without taking a single casualty. When the corpsman finally reaches Sigler again, he is unconscious. They carry him back to the aid station and from there to a hospital ship. He survives. The wound is serious but not fatal. He spends the rest of the war recovering and is eventually discharged. 2 years later, in 1947, he receives the Medal of Honor for actions on March 14, 1945. The citation is accurate, but it does not explain what happened. It states that he climbed the ridge under fire, destroyed an enemy position with grenades, was wounded, and continued to fight while evacuating wounded Marines and providing covering fire. All of this is true, but the citation does not explain why what he did mattered beyond that single day. It does not explain the geometry or the physics or the tactical realization that vertical assault negates the advantages of a fortified position. It does not explain that after March 14, 1945, Marine Corps officers and NCOs across Iwo Jima started looking at cave positions differently. They started asking whether they could climb above them. They started cooking grenades and dropping them instead of throwing them. They started teaching this to their men, and the men who survived Iwo Jima brought that knowledge to Okinawa, and the men who survived Okinawa brought it to the planning sessions for the invasion of Japan that never happened. The tactic was never formalized in the way that some innovations are. There is no field manual titled Vertical Grenade Assault. There is no training course dedicated to cooking grenades and dropping them into caves. But it became part of the institutional knowledge, the unwritten lessons that pass from veteran to replacement, from instructor to trainee, from one generation of Marines to the next. When the Korean War began and Marines were fighting in mountainous terrain against an enemy that used caves and bunkers, they remembered. When the Vietnam War brought tunnel warfare and spider holes, they adapted it again. The specific technique evolved, but the principle remained. When you cannot assault a position horizontally, think vertically. When the enemy has cover and elevation, take away their elevation. When they can return your grenades, do not give them time. There is a tendency in military history to focus on large-scale decisions, the movements of divisions and corps, the strategic choices made by generals and politicians. Those decisions matter. They shape the outcome of campaigns and wars. But there is another kind of history, smaller in scale but no less important, that happens at the level of a single squad, a single decision, a single moment when one person sees a problem differently than anyone else has seen it and acts on that vision under conditions where hesitation means death. Sigler's climb did not change the outcome of the Battle of Iwo Jima. The island was going to be taken regardless, but it changed the cost. Fox Company advanced through Bloody Gorge without losing another man to that machine gun. The Marines who cleared caves in the following days and weeks used variations of Sigler's tactic and died in fewer numbers than they would have otherwise. Those numbers are not recorded. There is no way to count the men who did not die because someone else figured out how to kill the enemy more efficiently. But they exist. They went home. They had children. Those children are alive today. That is the mathematics of war. Every innovation that reduces friendly casualties ripples forward through time in ways that cannot be fully calculated. Sigler himself did not speak much about what he did. This is common among men who receive the Medal of Honor. There is often a dissonance between the public recognition and the private memory. The citation describes heroism and courage and self-sacrifice. These are not inaccurate descriptions, but they are incomplete. What Sigler did required courage, but it also required something that is harder to define and less frequently celebrated. It required the ability to think clearly under conditions designed to prevent clear thinking. It required the ability to see a three-dimensional problem and solve it with the tools available. It required the ability to calculate risk and probability in real time while his friends were dying and the machine gun was firing and his own survival was uncertain from second to second. This is not instinct. Instinct does not teach you to cook a grenade. This is cognition under pressure. This is the ability to remain functional when every system in your body is telling you to run or freeze or stop thinking and just act. And it is this quality, more than courage alone, that makes the difference between effective soldiers and everyone else. The machine gun at Bloody Gorge was destroyed by 3 grenades dropped from above in a span of perhaps 20 seconds. The entire action, from the moment Sigler started climbing to the moment the 3rd grenade detonated, took less than 3 minutes. 3 minutes. 11 men had already died trying to take that position using conventional tactics. Sigler solved it in 3 minutes because he asked a question no one else had asked. What if we go over instead of through? It is not a complicated question. It is the kind of question a child might ask. But in the context of combat, where doctrine and training and instinct all push you toward established methods, asking that question and acting on the answer is the difference between breakthrough and stalemate. This is why the story matters beyond the individual. Military organizations are conservative by nature. They have to be. Tactics and procedures are written in blood, refined over years or decades of experience, and changing them requires evidence that the new method is better than the old one. But conservatism can also become rigidity. The Japanese defenders on Iwo Jima were following Doctrine too. Their doctrine said that caves and tunnels and fortified positions were nearly invulnerable to frontal assault, that the Americans would have to pay in blood for every position, that attrition favored the defender. And they were right until they were not. Sigler did not overturn Japanese doctrine. He found a seam in it. He found the one thing their defensive strategy assumed would not happen: that the attacker would achieve elevation without artillery or air support, that grenades would be delivered vertically with no time to respond, that the advantages of a fortified cave could be negated by a single rifleman with 3 fragmentation grenades and the willingness to climb 15 feet of volcanic rock under fire. War is often described as chaos, and there is truth to that description. But chaos is not random. It is complexity beyond immediate comprehension. And within that complexity, there are patterns, rules, physical laws that continue to operate regardless of how confused or terrified the people involved might be. Gravity works the same on Iwo Jima as it does anywhere else. Explosions in confined spaces produce overpressure regardless of who detonates them. Grenades with burning fuses will detonate in 4 to 5 seconds whether you throw them or drop them or hold them in your hand. These are constants. Sigler did not invent them. He recognized them and used them. The innovation was not in the physics. It was in the application of physics to a tactical problem under conditions where most men would not have been capable of thinking about physics at all. The wounded he dragged to safety are almost a footnote in the larger narrative, but they should not be. This is the other half of what he did. After being shot while bleeding in pain, he did not withdraw. He did not wait for someone else to help. He moved toward other wounded Marines and pulled them into cover and then provided suppressing fire so the platoon could continue advancing. This is not rational behavior in any self-interested sense. A rational actor, having been wounded, seeks medical attention and removes himself from danger. But combat does not select for rational actors in that narrow sense. It selects for men who are capable of subordinating self-interest to group survival, who are capable of continuing to function after the point where function should no longer be possible. This is what the Medal of Honor recognizes, not just the destruction of the enemy position but the refusal to stop, the continuation of effective action past the point where most people would have shut down. There is a philosophical question embedded in this. What is bravery? Is it the absence of fear, the willingness to act without hesitation, the capacity to endure pain and continue? Or is it something more specific, the ability to act effectively despite fear, to make decisions that increase the probability of success even when those decisions require you to accept personal risk that could be avoided? Sigler was afraid. Everyone is afraid. Fear is not optional. But he climbed the ridge anyway, and that choice was not irrational. It was calculated. He looked at the problem and determined that the risk of climbing was lower than the risk of remaining stuck, that the probability of success was higher if he went vertical than if the platoon tried another frontal assault. He was correct. The calculation worked. But it could have failed. If the machine gun crew had seen him earlier, if the covering fire had been less effective, if the rock face had been too sheer to climb, he would have died and the position would still be active and the gorge would still be impassable. The outcome does not validate the decision. The reasoning does. And that distinction is important because it is the only way to understand why some men succeed in combat and others do not. Luck matters. Chance matters. But calculation matters more. The Pacific War was defined by this kind of fighting. Island to island, cave to cave, yard by yard through terrain that offered every advantage to the defender. The Japanese strategy was explicit. Make the Americans pay such a high cost for every objective that the invasion of the home islands would be unthinkable. They believed that American casualties would eventually exhaust American will. They were not entirely wrong. The projected casualties for Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan, were catastrophic. Estimates ranged from hundreds of thousands to over 1 million American dead and wounded, and multiples of that for Japanese military and civilian casualties. The atomic bombs ended the war before those estimates could be tested. But in the interim, between February 1945 when Iwo Jima was invaded and August 1945 when the war ended, every tactic that reduced casualties mattered. Every innovation that allowed Marines to clear fortified positions more efficiently mattered. Sigler's tactic was one of those innovations. It was not the only one. There were others, developed by other men in other desperate situations, and collectively they made the difference between acceptable losses and unacceptable ones. The beach landings on Iwo Jima were brutal but comprehensible. Naval gunfire, air support, armor, artillery, the full weight of American industrial and military power applied to a narrow strip of volcanic sand. The casualties were high, but the progress was measurable. You could see the line moving forward. But once the Marines moved inland, into the ridges and gorges and cave networks, the paradigm shifted. Firepower alone was insufficient. You could call in air strikes and artillery and naval gunfire and pound the terrain into dust. And when the smoke cleared, the enemy would still be there, underground, waiting. The solution was not more firepower. It was different tactics. Close assault, demolitions, flamethrowers, and, increasingly, innovation at the squad level, individual Marines figuring out how to solve problems that the doctrine did not address because the doctrine was still being written. Sigler was awarded the Medal of Honor, but he was not the only Marine on Iwo Jima to receive it. 27 Medals of Honor were awarded for actions on that island, more than any other single battle in Marine Corps history. This is not because Marines on Iwo Jima were braver than Marines on other islands. It is because Iwo Jima required that kind of fighting. Selected for it. The terrain, the enemy, the tactical situation, all of it created conditions where individual initiative and extraordinary action were not optional. They were necessary. Sigler's story is one of 27, and behind those 27 are thousands of other stories of men who did things that would have earned recognition in any other context but on Iwo Jima were simply part of the baseline requirement to survive and advance. This is the nature of that battle. It compressed months of normal combat intensity into weeks, and the result was a concentration of violence and innovation that left an imprint on everyone who survived it. When historians write about Iwo Jima, they focus on the flag raising on Mount Suribachi, the iconic photograph, the symbolism. That moment matters. It represents something important about American resolve and sacrifice. But it also obscures the rest of the battle. Suribachi fell on the 5th day. The battle lasted 36 days. The fighting after Suribachi was worse than the fighting before it, and it is in that fighting, in the ridges and gorges and caves, that the real cost was paid. Sigler's action happened on day 24, 3 weeks after the flag was raised. in a part of the battle that is rarely discussed outside of unit histories and veteran memoirs. This is the paradox of war. The moments that define it are not always the moments that are remembered. The photograph on Suribachi is remembered because it is visible, symbolic, clean. The fight at Bloody Gorge is forgotten because it is none of those things. It is small, specific, brutal, and it does not fit into a narrative that the public wants to hear. But it is no less significant. The men who fought in places like Bloody Gorge came home to a country that was ready to move on. The war was over. The victory parades had happened. The focus was on rebuilding, on the future, on forgetting the worst parts and remembering the heroic narrative. The veterans themselves often contributed to this. They did not talk about the things they had seen or done, not because they were ashamed, but because there was no way to explain it to people who had not been there. How do you describe the sound a grenade makes when it detonates inside a cave? How do you describe what it feels like to climb toward a machine gun that has already killed your friends? How do you describe the weight of a wounded man you are dragging across volcanic rock while you are bleeding and someone is shooting at you? You do not. You move on. You get a job. You start a family. You live your life. And the stories stay locked inside, shared only with other men who were there, who understand without explanation. Sigler lived until 1994. He died at the age of 70, nearly 50 years after the battle. In that time he worked, raised a family, and by all accounts lived a quiet life. The Medal of Honor was not something he displayed prominently or talked about often. This is typical. The medal is a recognition, but it is also a burden. It marks you as someone who did something extraordinary, and that marking never goes away. People treat you differently. They expect things from you. They assume you are somehow more than human, when the truth is that you are exactly as human as you always were, and what you did was not superhuman, it was simply human action under inhuman conditions. Sigler understood this. He did what he did because it needed to be done and he was the one in position to do it. That is not modesty. That is accuracy.